Every story the world sees about Can Yaman is painted with light, bright cameras, flashing smiles, screaming fans, and magazine covers that crown him as one of the most desired men alive. To millions, he is the definition of success, the dream every actor chases but few ever reach. But what if behind that polished image, behind the glamour and the headlines, there was a truth no one dared to imagine? Because Can's story is not just about fame. It's about silence. About a single moment where a choice, so small, so ordinary, changed everything. Not a scandal, not a fight, not even a betrayal. No. The turning point was something far simpler, far quieter, a phone call. It happened in the stillness of the night, when the world outside was asleep and the only sound was the faint ticking of a clock on his wall. His phone lit up, and on that screen appeared a name that carried 1,000 memories. A name that brought back laughter, stolen glances, and promises that were never fully kept. He stared at it. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a second, he felt like he was standing at the edge of two worlds, the one he had built as a star, and the one he had lost as a man. Answering would mean reopening old wounds, tearing down the walls he had built around his heart. Ignoring it would mean letting the silence speak louder than love. That night, he chose silence. He didn't return the call. And though the world never knew, that single choice became the heaviest secret he carried. For years, he kept it buried beneath interviews, red carpets, and roles that distracted him from the truth. But the weight of silence is cruel. It presses on you until the regret becomes unbearable. And for Can, that regret never left. The world saw his strength, but what they didn't see was the memory that haunted him every night, the call he never returned. Fame can make you feel invincible, but deep down, it doesn't erase who you are. That night, Can wasn't the global superstar, the heartthrob adored by millions. He was just a man, alone in his apartment, staring at a phone that rang with more power than any headline ever could. The name on the screen wasn't just a name. It was a chapter of his life he had tried so hard to close. Every letter of it carried weight, every vibration of the phone pulled him closer to the memories he had fought to bury. It was Demet. Suddenly, he was no longer in his apartment. He was back on the set of their first project together, when their eyes met in a way that felt like destiny. He remembered the moments between scenes, the way laughter came so easily, the way silence between them wasn't empty but full of unspoken words. He remembered the nights after filming, when the lines between their characters and their real selves blurred until they didn't know where the story ended and their truth began. And now, after all this time, she was calling. Was it a cry for help? A confession she had never dared to say out loud? Or was it something even harder, a goodbye, one final attempt to reach him before letting go forever? His thumb hovered above the screen. He could almost hear her voice in his mind. He could almost see her, waiting on the other side of the line, hoping he would pick up. His entire being screamed at him to answer. But fear is powerful. Fear of reopening old wounds. Fear of admitting that he still cared. Fear of what the world would say if it all came crashing down again. So he let it ring. And when it stopped, the silence that followed was like a knife to the heart. He told himself it was the right choice. That some stories weren't meant to be revived. That sometimes the past should stay in the past. But as he placed the phone face down on the table, he felt a heaviness he couldn't shake. A part of him knew, even in that moment, that he had just lost something he could never get back. Because sometimes, it isn't the things we do that haunt us, it's the things we leave undone. And for Can, the call he never returned would become the ghost that followed him for years. Regret has a way of growing in silence. At first, it feels like nothing more than a whisper, a thought you can push away. But the more you ignore it, the louder it becomes, until it turns into a scream inside your chest. For Can Yaman, the call he never returned became exactly that, a scream he could not silence. In the days that followed, he told himself it didn't matter. He buried himself in work, in scripts, in endless interviews where his smile was rehearsed and his answers carefully polished. He walked on red carpets, posed for flashing cameras, and appeared untouchable to the world. Yet behind every smile, behind every lens, there was a voice echoing in his mind, "Why didn't you pick up?" Each night, when the lights were off and the crowds were gone, that memory returned. He would look at his phone, remembering the screen lighting up with her name, remembering the way his heart raced, the way his hands trembled, the way he chose silence. And in those quiet moments, the mask of the celebrity slipped away, leaving only a man haunted by what could have been. Because he knew. Deep down, he knew that if he had answered, things might have been different. Maybe it would have led to one last conversation, one last chance to heal the wounds between them. Maybe it would have led to reconciliation, or at least closure. But by not answering, he had chosen uncertainty. He had chosen to live with the question of what if. And what if is the heaviest burden of all. The regret began to seep into everything. On set, in the middle of filming a romantic scene, he would sometimes lose focus, staring into the eyes of his co-star but thinking of the woman whose call he had ignored. During press tours, when fans asked about love and destiny, he would give charming answers, but behind his words was a man who had once been too afraid to listen to his own heart. Even his friends noticed. In quiet gatherings, when the laughter died down, Ken would fall silent, lost in thought. When asked what was wrong, he brushed it off with a joke. But the truth was written in the way he stared at his glass, the way he drifted away mid-conversation, the way his eyes held a sadness no one could quite name. Years passed, and still the memory didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. Because time doesn't erase regret, it magnifies it. Every success, every triumph in his career, was accompanied by that one invisible shadow, the thought of what he had lost that night. While Ken stared at his phone that night, frozen in fear and pride, Demet was on the other side of the line, waiting. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the call button, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the dial tone. It wasn't easy for her to make that call. In fact, it had taken weeks of sleepless nights, endless debates with herself, and a courage she wasn't even sure she had left. For her, this wasn't just a call. It was a lifeline. It was a chance to say what she had kept buried inside for far too long. She didn't expect miracles, she didn't even know if she wanted them. What she wanted, what she needed, was to hear his voice one more time, to know that he was still there, somewhere beneath the walls he had built around himself. As the phone rang, she imagined 100 different outcomes. Maybe he would pick up and the silence between them would finally break. Maybe he would be cold, distant, unwilling to talk, but at least she would know. Maybe he would surprise her and confess the same feelings she had never truly stopped carrying. But none of those things happened. The ringing went on, and then, it stopped. Her heart sank. She stared at her own screen, waiting, hoping he would call back, that maybe he just needed a moment to collect himself. Minutes turned into hours, but the phone never lit up again. And in that silence, Demet felt the sharp sting of reality, he wasn't coming back. Tears welled in her eyes as she placed the phone beside her. She had risked everything to make that call, her pride, her carefully guarded emotions, her last shred of hope. And with no answer, it felt like she had lost it all. What Ken never knew was that on the night he chose silence, Demet chose vulnerability. She had reached out, breaking down the barriers she had built, daring to reopen a wound she had sworn never to touch again. And when there was no answer, the wound cut even deeper. In the days that followed, she tried to move on, hiding the pain beneath her radiant smile, burying her emotions in new projects, in public appearances, in pretending that she was untouched. But behind closed doors, she replayed that moment again and again, the ringing, the silence, the unanswered hope. For both of them, that night became a scar. For Can, it was the regret of what he hadn't done. For Demet, it was the heartbreak of reaching out and being met with silence. And neither of them could escape it. Because sometimes love doesn't end with a fight or a farewell. Sometimes it ends with a call that never gets returned. Years passed, but time didn't heal this wound, it deepened it. Fame continued to follow Can everywhere. New roles came, international projects, magazine covers in Italy, Spain, even Hollywood whispers. On the outside, he seemed untouchable, a man who had conquered the world. But no matter where he went, one thing followed him, the ghost of that unanswered call. It wasn't just a memory, it was a shadow in everything he did. During interviews, when journalists asked about love, his eyes would flicker for a moment, as if his mind had traveled elsewhere. When fans screamed his name, he smiled, but deep down he knew none of them could ever fill the silence left behind. Even in his happiest moments, celebrating success, meeting powerful people, there was always that question echoing inside him, what if I had answered? Because regret doesn't vanish. It grows. Some nights, when the noise of the world was gone, Can would sit alone and replay that moment. He would imagine what her voice might have sounded like. Maybe shaky, maybe steady, but always filled with truth. He imagined the words she might have said, I miss you, or I need you, or maybe even, I still love you. But he would never know. And that not knowing, that endless wondering, was the cruelest punishment of all. Demet, on her side, carried her own scar. She poured her energy into her work, into building herself stronger, more independent, more unshakable. But even for her, that night lingered. It was the memory of giving everything, only to be met with silence. And silence, sometimes, is louder than rejection. Years later, when both of them were asked about regrets in life, they each hesitated before answering. Neither mentioned the call. Neither dared to speak of it. But in their eyes, in the way Can would look away for a moment, in the way Demet's voice softened when asked about love lost, it was there. Hidden, but present. For Can, it became part of his story. A story the world never saw. A secret regret he carried quietly, one that shaped the man he became. Because the truth was simple, he wasn't haunted by what happened that night. He was haunted by what didn't happen. Life gives us countless chances, but sometimes the most important ones come disguised as small moments. A phone call. A name on a screen. A choice between courage and fear. Can Yaman's choice that night was silence. And that silence changed everything. The world may never know the full truth of what was lost in that moment. But behind the fame, behind the interviews, behind the perfect photos, there is a man who remembers. A man who knows that sometimes the call you don't return becomes the story you can never escape. And perhaps, the greatest truth Can Yaman ever hid for years was not about scandal, not about secrets, not about fame. It was about love. A love that slipped through his fingers, not because it ended, but because he chose not to answer. So when fans look into his eyes and see a spark of mystery, when they wonder what pain lies behind that perfect smile, the answer might be simpler than they think. Somewhere, deep inside, he is still listening for a call that will never come again. Because sometimes, the most heartbreaking goodbyes are the ones never spoken. And the loudest truths are the ones hidden in silence.